My parents said I was a useless loser and threw me out. Go sleep in the street, my dad shouted. They didn't know I run a $15 million business from my laptop. I just smirked, grabbed my bag, and walked away silent. 3 weeks later, their landlord arrived, and I was standing right behind him. My own father told me to go sleep in the gutter. But those words weren't the shock that broke me, it was the chilling realization he didn't even know who I truly was, or the disaster he was about to unleash. The air in that dining room was thick with a cold silence, one I'd felt 1,000 times growing up. This time, though, it was different. This time, the silence held a promise of a reckoning. I was 28, and his exact words, "You're a worthless failure. Pack your junk and get out of my house. Go sleep in the damn gutter if you have to," weren't even the worst part. It was the way he said it, calm and cold, like I was some stranger who'd overstayed his welcome, not his son. My name is Ethan, and yeah, on paper, I didn't look like much. No house, no suits, no Rolex, no girlfriend for Thanksgiving. I didn't talk about my job, mostly because no one in my family ever asked. But if they had, I could have told them the truth. I ran a fully remote tech consultancy with over 30 contractors. My company had just hit $15.4 million in revenue that year, all from my laptop. To my parents, though, I was still just the lazy son who never got a real job. It's funny how families paint a picture of you and refuse to let it go, even decades later. I was always the quiet one. My older brother, Marcus, was the golden child, star athlete, big personality, straight A's, dad's favorite. I was into computers, books, making money online. My parents never quite got it. When I was 17, I made $3,000 in a week flipping domain names, thinking they'd be proud. Instead, Dad told me to stop playing on the internet and mow the lawn. So, I learned to keep things to myself. After college, I didn't take a traditional job. I freelanced, built connections, slowly scaled up until I had a team, clients on retainer, and recurring revenue. By 26, I was making more in a month than my parents made in a year. But I lived simply, hoodies, jeans, working from cafes. I didn't flaunt anything, I didn't feel the need. And that, apparently, was my biggest mistake. The real blow-up happened on a grim Thursday in February. I'd flown back home after Mom had guilt-tripped me about not making time for family. Marcus had just bought a new car, and Dad was out front helping him buff the hood like it was a newborn. I said, "Hey." Offered to grab coffee. Dad didn't even look at me, just mumbled something about how nice it must be to have no responsibilities. That was the first sting. At dinner, it got worse. Marcus was holding court, as usual, talking about some real estate deal he'd botched but spun into a learning experience. Everyone laughed like it was genius. I just listened. Then Marcus smirked at me, "Still doing that laptop thing, bro, or did you finally give up and get a real job?" That was the second sting, and it hit hard. Mom chuckled. "You know, honey, we worry about you sometimes. You're almost 30. Nothing stable, no house, no wife. Marcus is already talking about kids." "Just because I don't parade everything I do doesn't mean I'm failing," I said quietly. "Oh, come on," Dad scoffed. "You're living in a fantasy world, Ethan. Playing pretend entrepreneur for years. Meanwhile, your brother's building a real future." I set down my fork. "I've built something real, too." "Right," Marcus laughed. "The mysterious empire you never talk about. Because none of you care enough to ask." I snapped, before I could stop myself. The room went silent. Mom's face tightened. Dad leaned back, arms crossed, that familiar sneer spreading across his face, the one he used when I got a B+ instead of an A, the look that made me feel 10 years old and small. "You want us to ask about your little fantasy company? Fine, let's talk. What exactly do you do, Ethan?" "I run a tech consultancy. I build automation systems for mid-sized firms." I've got contracts with clients in the US, Canada, and Toronto. I have a team. Team? Dad cut in. What team? Developers, project managers. I built the framework. I oversee operations. Last quarter, we cleared just over $3 million. That should have been the mic drop. Instead, they laughed. Dad actually laughed in my face. You expect me to believe that? That you, sitting in your room all day, are raking in millions? Get real. If that were true, you'd have a house. You'd buy your mother something nicer than that $20 candle you gave her for Christmas. Mom's face twisted in disappointment. Is this why you never offered to help with anything, Ethan? Because you think you're better than us now? I blinked. What? I see how you act, she said, folding her arms. Always quiet, always judging. You probably think we're all losers because we don't have your online empire. I never said that. You didn't have to, Dad said. You think you're too good for this family. Maybe it's time you stop mooching and go be successful somewhere else. I paid for your mortgage 3 months ago, I said slowly. The room went dead quiet. You were behind on payments. I called the bank and paid the balance in full just so the house wouldn't get flagged again. You what? Dad growled. You didn't even know. I looked between them. The letters were piling up. I called the bank from my hotel room and wired the funds. You went behind my back, he roared. You think you can just throw money around like you own the place? I didn't want you to lose the house. You know what? Get out right now. You want to act like the big shot? Go live like one. You're not welcome here anymore. I stared at him. You're serious? He stood up, veins bulging at his neck. Get out. Go sleep in the gutter, hotshot. My chest went hollow, but I didn't say anything. I just stood, walked to the guest room, packed my bag, and left. No dramatic goodbye, no parting shot. I just walked out the front door, got in my rental car, and drove off. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Our Toronto client had just signed the renewal. I forwarded her a thank you and kept driving. That should have been the end of it, but 3 weeks later, I got a call from someone I never expected, their landlord. And that's when I knew the tables were about to turn. I didn't pick up the call the first time. I was in the middle of a quarterly review call with my legal team, going over updated terms for a long-term client. When I saw the missed call from an unfamiliar number back in my hometown, I assumed it was spam. Then I saw the voicemail, a gruff, uncertain voice. Hi, this is Robert Jenkins, landlord for 2125 Whitman Street. I'm calling about a lease renewal situation. It's probably best we talk soon. It's kind of urgent. Thanks. Whitman Street. That was my parents' house. At first, I thought he had the wrong number. I had no formal connection to the house anymore. I hadn't lived there since I was 19. But then I remembered I'd used my company's legal department to pay off that mortgage balance anonymously. The bank had been days away from triggering proceedings. I hadn't wanted them to lose the house, especially not without knowing. Now, it sounded like something else was going wrong. I called him back. Mr. Jenkins, I said once he picked up. Yeah. Is this Ethan? Yes. You mentioned a lease? He cleared his throat awkwardly. Yeah. I know you're not listed as the tenant, but I was told you were the one handling payments. Not exactly, I said carefully. I helped clear their mortgage a few months ago, but I'm not a resident. Well, the thing is, he said, your dad hasn't paid rent in over 2 months. I blinked. Rent? I thought they owned the place. Jenkins made a low whistling noise. They don't own anything. This house was foreclosed and bought out back in September. Your parents are renting it month to month. I'm the property manager for the company that acquired it. Been lenient since winter, but I can't hold off much longer. That hit like a punch to the gut. They'd lied. All of them. The pride, the arrogance, the way they looked down on me for not owning a home they'd been renting the whole time and not even paying on time. He continued, they kept promising that some money was coming from you, that you were covering it. But when nothing showed up, I figured I'd call you myself. I gripped the phone tighter. I haven't agreed to pay anything since December. If they told you otherwise, that's not on me. Jenkins paused. Got it. Well, I gave them one last notice. They're on final warning. If I don't get this month's rent by Friday, I'll be showing up with the eviction paperwork. I understand. Just wanted to give you a heads up. And then, just as I was about to thank him and hang up, he said something that made my blood run cold. Funny thing, though, I walked in last week to do a plumbing inspection. Place was packed. Looked like they were setting up for a party. Even saw your name written on a sign on the kitchen island. Some kind of celebration dinner. They said it was your birthday or something. Whole family was coming. You know anything about that? My mouth went dry. No, I said slowly. No, I didn't. He hung up, and I sat there staring at the wall for a long time. That was the beginning of the unraveling. I hadn't spoken to my parents in weeks. I'd told myself it was over, I'd drawn the line, walked away. But somehow they were still trying to use me, still planning parties in my name, still dragging me into whatever mess they were hiding from the rest of the world. I checked the calendar. Sure enough, next Saturday was my birthday. Except no one had invited me to anything. 3 days later, I got a call from my cousin Olivia. Hey, she said brightly. Just confirming. You're still coming to the birthday dinner, right? What birthday dinner? She laughed. Yours, dummy. Aunt Susan said they were doing something for you. You didn't know? No, I didn't. There was a long silence. Wait, you're not going? No one told me about it. I got the invite 2 weeks ago. Said it was a surprise dinner for Ethan's 29th birthday. There's even a catering service coming. Catering? That didn't make sense. My parents weren't paying their rent. How were they affording catering? Then it clicked. They weren't paying for it. They were saying I was. That night, I called my younger cousin David, who lived just a few blocks from my parents. Hey, I said, do you know anything about the dinner they're planning this weekend? Yeah, it's supposed to be at your place, he said. My place? My old house? Everyone's saying it's a surprise dinner thrown by you for the family. Aunt Susan said you wanted to make amends. I nearly dropped the phone. They were throwing a party in my name at a house they didn't own, with money they didn't have. And they were telling everyone I was the host. And I wasn't even invited. I should have walked away. I should have let it go. But something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about pride anymore. This was about control, deception, manipulation. They'd always painted me as the failure, the disappointment, the quiet one who never measured up. And now that I'd finally found peace, they were hijacking my name, reputation, and success to mask their own mess. That was the breaking point. I started digging. Over the next 48 hours, I went full operator mode, pulled property records, tenant filings, spoke to the real estate firm that managed the house. The entire place had been auctioned off in late fall. My payment to the bank hadn't been used to restore the mortgage, it had only paid off lingering debt. The deed had transferred months ago. My parents were effectively squatters with a rental agreement, and not even a valid one at that. They'd lied to everyone. But it didn't stop there. When I checked my business expense logs, I noticed something strange. 2 charges for a catering company called Lavender Grove Events. One from last year during our team retreat. Another from just last week, except I hadn't hired them recently. I called them up. Lavender Grove, this is Sarah. Hi Sarah, this is Ethan Hayes. I think there's been a charge to my company's account that I didn't authorize. Let me check. Oh, yes. We have a booking for a Saturday dinner. Whitman Street. You were listed as the payer. Same card on file. What was the name on the order? She hesitated. Marcus Hayes. My brother. He had somehow accessed an old invoice or pulled my company card info. I had no idea how. Maybe Mom had found an old email. Or maybe Marcus had snooped on my laptop when I visited for Christmas last year. But he'd booked a catered event under my company's name without permission. This wasn't just lying. This was fraud. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the same questions spinning in my mind. How far would they go? How long had they been doing this? And why? Why didn't they care? My whole life, I tried to earn their respect. Tried to be the good son without showing off. I thought if I was generous, kind, forgiving, they'd eventually see me, the real me. But now I realized they didn't want to see me succeed. They wanted to use me to appear successful. And that made them dangerous. The next day, I got a text from Marcus. Looking forward to seeing you this weekend, little bro, hope you don't mind the party. Everyone's really excited. Smiley face. I didn't respond. He texted again, this time with a photo, the dining room table at the old house, decked out with silverware, floral centerpieces, and a printed sign that read, "Welcome to Ethan's family celebration hosted by our favorite son." That was the last straw. I called Jenkins. "Mr. Jenkins," I said, my voice calm. "You mentioned that Friday was the last day to pay rent before eviction." "Yep. That's the final deadline. I assume you'll be showing up in person?" "Like I said." "Would you mind if I came with you?" There was a pause. "Is that legal?" "It's your call," I said. "But let's just say I have a vested interest in how this plays out. And I think it's time they saw who they were actually dealing with." He chuckled softly. "Be my guest." I hung up. I still didn't know what I was going to do, not exactly. But I knew one thing. The dinner was still happening. They were still pretending, still smiling to the world while hiding the rot inside. And this time, I wouldn't walk away. This time, I was going to make sure they felt it. Not with anger, not with screaming or threats, but with silence, precision, and a little paperwork. But that all comes later. Because first, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to stand in that house on the day they planned to celebrate me without me and watch the whole illusion come crumbling down. I needed to be there when their landlord showed up with the final notice, and I was standing right behind him. There's something surreal about hitting rock bottom while technically sitting at the top. The week leading up to the birthday dinner crawled by in slow motion. Every day I went through the motions, managing client calls, approving budgets, checking in with my team, but my mind was somewhere else. Somewhere back on Whitman Street, at that table I used to eat cereal at while Dad lectured me about getting real. Now they were dressing it up to host a party in my name, without me. They wanted to wear my success like a borrowed suit, one they never believed I'd own. And worse, part of me still wanted to be invited. That realization hit me hard. For all the anger, all the betrayal, there was still a quiet, pathetic little voice in the back of my head whispering, maybe they'll call. Maybe they'll realize they were wrong. But the call never came. I spent that Friday night in a downtown hotel room 2 hours from home, staring at the ceiling and asking myself questions I didn't have the courage to answer. Why did I care so much? Why did their approval still feel like oxygen? At around 1 a.m., I finally got up, dragged my laptop to the tiny desk by the window, and opened a blank document. I didn't know what I was doing, really. I just started typing. It started with a single sentence: "My name is Ethan Hayes, and I am not a failure." I stared at it for a while. It felt stupid at first, like some affirmation you'd find in a self-help book. But then my fingers started moving again. I wrote about the first $200 I made online at age 15, helping a Canadian bookstore automate their inventory. I wrote about the nights I stayed up teaching myself Python while Marcus laughed in the other room with his friends. I wrote about the day I signed my first international client and cried alone in a generic Motel 6 because I had no one to tell. I wrote about the silence, about how every win felt smaller when there was no one to witness it. About how I spent years trying to succeed quietly, thinking that would earn me respect. That if I didn't rub it in anyone's face, they'd eventually see it on their own. But they didn't. They only saw what they wanted to see. By the time I stopped typing, the sun was coming up. I hit save, closed the laptop, and sat there in the golden morning light, hollowed out, but lighter. That was my first step back up. The next few days, I changed things. Not all at once, but enough to feel it. I started sharing more with my team. Let them see the human behind the business. During Monday's call, I told them I'd been dealing with some personal stuff. Nothing dramatic, just a little honesty. The result? I got flooded with messages afterward. People thanking me, opening up about their own families, their own baggage. I realized I wasn't alone in this weird in-between space, successful but unseen, accomplished but isolated. Then I got a message from Zoe, one of my earliest hires, a junior PM I'd promoted after just 3 months. We hadn't talked much one-on-one recently. "Hey boss," she wrote, "just wanted to say you've always been solid, but this week you feel real. I like this version of you." It made me smile. Later that evening, I decided to go back to my apartment, the one I'd barely touched since the blow-up. I had been staying in random hotels, floating around like a ghost. But something about that letter I wrote, something about acknowledging what had happened, made me want to reclaim my space. The place was dusty. My mail was overflowing. But it was mine. I opened the window, let the breeze in, and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, just listening to the city hum outside. I thought about everything I had, not just the company, but the freedom, the ability to pick up and go anywhere, live anywhere, build anything. And somehow that made me feel safe for the first time in months. The next morning, I made a list, not a revenge list, not yet. This one was for me. Finish registering the new Nevada entity. Move all personal logins off the shared family email. Why hadn't I done this sooner? Update all corporate cards with new 2-factor authentication. Book 3 weeks in Barcelona. Work remote. Reset. Write something personal every day. That last one was important. Writing had never been a thing I planned, it just happened. But that late-night letter to myself had sparked something. So I kept it going. Every night before bed, I wrote 1 page. Sometimes about work, sometimes about my past, sometimes just about what I ate that day. It helped a lot. I was rebuilding, not just my routines, but me. And then, just as I was beginning to breathe again, I got a call that pulled me right back in. It was Mrs. Wallace. She was my godmother, technically, but more like the only adult in my life who ever treated me like I had something to say. She used to sneak me cookies during Christmas dinners and call me the clever one when I showed her my little side projects. "Ethan," she said, sounding nervous. "I hate to ask, but are you really throwing that party?" I sighed. "No, I'm not. I figured. Your father told me you were flying in with some big announcement. That you'd bought the house and were giving it to them as a gift." I blinked. "What?" "That's what they told everyone." That you'd made it big in crypto or coding or something, and were coming home to show the family how successful you are. My jaw tightened. They're using my name to cover their lies. I know, sweetheart. And I'm so sorry, but you need to know they've invited over 50 people. 50. They even invited Pastor Miller from the old church. He thinks it's a big reconciliation dinner. I let that sink in. They were creating a spectacle, not just for ego, but for redemption. They were rewriting history in real time, turning me into the hero of a story I was never even told existed. They're lying to everyone, I said. Yes, she whispered. But I believe you. And I had to warn you, because if you show up, they're going to use you. And if you don't show up, they'll spin it. Make you the villain. That made something inside me harden. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. This wasn't about proving myself. It wasn't even about revenge, yet. It was about truth. I ended the call, stood by the window, and watched the cars crawl by in the street below. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened a fresh notebook and I wrote out everything I wanted to say to my father, every insult, every lie, every time he looked at me and saw nothing. I wrote about the gutter, about the look in his eyes when he said those words, "Go sleep in the gutter." I wrote until my hands hurt. And then I took a deep breath, closed the notebook, and made a decision. I was going to that dinner. Not as a guest, not as a son, but as myself. Not to yell, not to burn bridges, but to stand there calm, undeniable, present, and let their illusions collapse under the weight of reality. I called Jenkins. "We still good for Saturday?" I asked. "Yep. Eviction notice is printed. They've got no idea it's coming." "Great. I'll be standing right behind you." He chuckled. "You sure you want to be there for that?" "More than anything." That night, I booked a stylist to come by. Nothing too fancy, just a fitted blazer, clean look, polished but understated. I didn't need to show off. I just needed to walk in like the person I truly was. I called my assistant and cleared Monday's calendar. And I booked a photographer, not for social media, but for documentation. Because when the house of cards came down, I wanted a record, not to post, not to gloat, but to remember. To remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I had been used, that I had been betrayed, and that I survived it anyway. That I rose, not in spite of the fall, but because of it. Now all that was left was to walk through the door and watch the story they built around my silence finally shatter. Saturday morning arrived colder than expected. There was something poetic about it, how the sky stayed overcast like it was holding its breath. The kind of gray that made everything look slightly off, like a dream you weren't sure was real. I stood by the window of my hotel suite, sipping a coffee I barely tasted, staring down at the city that had once felt like a cage and now felt like mine. I was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that only comes after you've already lived through the worst version of something in your head 100 times. This wasn't revenge out of rage. It wasn't a scream for validation. It was a necessary correction, a realignment of truth. And I was done letting other people tell my story, especially people who had gone out of their way to erase me from it. I checked the time, 10:14 a.m. 4 hours to go. The surprise dinner wasn't until 3, but the real event would start earlier, when the landlord showed up with the eviction notice. According to Jenkins, he timed it to hit around 1:30 p.m., just as the guests would be arriving. His tone on the phone had been neutral, but I could hear the undercurrent of curiosity. I think part of him thought I was going to back out, that I'd get cold feet and disappear. But this time, I was all in. The last few days had been a whirlwind of careful, surgical preparation. I'd had my legal team draft an affidavit detailing the unauthorized use of my business credit card for the catering expenses. I wasn't pressing charges, not yet, but I wanted the documentation ready in case Marcus tried to twist the narrative or push back. The last thing I needed was them crying defamation. I also sent a cease and desist template, signed, to my own email from our legal inbox, just in case I needed to show it to anyone. It looked formal, intimidating, real, because it was. Next, I called Lavender Grove Events again. I asked to confirm the cancellation of the booking. Sarah, the manager, was surprised. "Are you sure?" "Your brother said, I never authorized the booking in the first place," I said. She hesitated. "Do you want to file a complaint?" "No," I replied. "I just want you to know, if they try to pass this off as a last-minute no-show, that's on them. Not me." She got quiet for a moment. "Honestly," she said, "you sound like the only sane one in that family." I smiled. "You have no idea." Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Olivia, my cousin, the one who had texted me earlier about the dinner. She answered almost immediately. "Ethan, yeah, you free to talk?" "For you, always." There was a short silence. Then she said, "Are you coming?" "Yes, but not for the party." "I need a favor." "Name it." And so I told her everything, the fake dinner, the eviction, the forged catering expense. The lies stacked so high they were practically casting a shadow over the whole neighborhood. By the time I finished, she was silent. "Ethan, they used you," she said, her voice tight. I knew something felt wrong, but this is insane. "Yeah. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing big," I said. "Just observe. Be my eyes and ears once I'm inside. If people start asking questions, I want you to pay attention to how they spin the story. Record only if it feels natural. I'm not trying to make a podcast. I just want witnesses. Someone besides me who sees the cracks." "I'll be there," she said. "And Ethan, yeah, they don't deserve you." I exhaled slowly. That's the point. By noon, I was dressed and ready. Tailored black slacks, crisp white button-up, dark gray blazer, clean-shaven, hair neat, watch subtle but expensive, just enough to register if someone was paying attention. I didn't want to flex. I wanted to contrast. I wanted to walk into that house and look so undeniably put together that no lie could stick to me. At 12:40, I got into the car with Jenkins. He was a burly guy in his late 50s, thick glasses, gray beard, polo shirt with the management company's logo stitched above the chest pocket. He had the eviction notice folded in a manila envelope, tucked into a clipboard resting between us on the seat like some silent passenger. "You ready for this?" he asked as we pulled out of the parking lot. "Yeah." No second thoughts. "Not even one," he nodded. "You're calmer than I expected." "Anger makes you sloppy," I said. "This isn't revenge. It's a reality check." He chuckled. "Wish more people handled their problems this cleanly." I didn't respond. I was too busy watching the city melt away into suburbs. As we drove, my mind kept flicking back to random moments over the years. Dad pulling the belt from the drawer when I came home with a C+ in math. Marcus borrowing my old laptop and never giving it back. Mom telling me not to brag when I mentioned my business hitting 6 figures. The way they always made me feel like an outsider in my own life. By the time we turned onto Whitman Street, I was done reminiscing. This was a new chapter, and I was writing it on my terms. We parked just down the street, out of direct view of the house. It looked like something out of a Pinterest board. Streamers on the mailbox, balloons tied to the porch, folding tables and extra chairs lined up along the walkway like they were expecting a wedding. A giant banner stretched above the front window, Ethan's homecoming celebration. Family is forever. I almost laughed. The irony was suffocating. Jenkins checked his watch. "It's 1:28. You want to go in first, or follow me?" "I'll follow." He stepped out of the car, clipboard in hand. I waited 10 seconds, then followed behind, sunglasses on, expression neutral. The front door was cracked open. Voices inside, laughter, clinking dishes. Jenkins knocked. Marcus opened the door. He was wearing a suit, not a good one, something shiny and ill-fitted, like he'd borrowed it for a job interview 10 years ago and never had it tailored. His fake smile flickered when he saw me. "Oh, you came," he said. I didn't respond. Jenkins held out the clipboard. "Mr. Hayes?" Marcus frowned. "Yeah? I'm here to serve you and Carol Hayes with a formal notice of eviction, non-payment. You've exceeded your final grace period." The air shifted instantly. "What?" Marcus sputtered. "You're 2 months behind. I have here a signed notice from the management company. You'll have 7 days to vacate. After that, enforcement begins." My father appeared behind Marcus, mouth already open to speak. Then he saw me and froze. "Ethan." I tilted my head slightly. "Dad? What? What's going on?" Jenkins handed him a second copy of the notice. "You were informed about this multiple times. Your son has no legal obligation here. You signed the lease. You defaulted. This is your responsibility." I thought. Dad turned to me, eyes wild. "You said you paid the mortgage." "I did. Once. Months ago. To help you before I found out you lost the house and lied about it." Mom appeared next. Makeup perfect, smile brittle, like she'd walked out of a catalog. "Ethan," she said. "Come inside, please. This is a misunderstanding." "No," I said from the driveway. I saw guests arriving, cousins, aunts, old neighbors, people I hadn't seen since high school. They looked confused, sensing tension. Olivia walked up behind me, her phone already out in her hand, not recording, just visible support. Marcus stepped forward. "You're ruining everything." I looked at him calmly. "You stole my credit card info and booked catering in my name. You told everyone I was hosting this party. You lied to 50 people to save face. You're overreacting." I took out the folded document from my inner pocket. "Here's an affidavit from my legal team. It details every unauthorized charge. I'm not filing anything yet, but if you speak one more lie using my name, I'll press charges." Mom looked like she'd been slapped. Dad's mouth opened again, but no words came out. I handed Jenkins the go-ahead signal. "Do your job," I said. And as he walked past them into the house to post the notice inside, I stepped back and stood by the sidewalk. Guests were whispering. Some were already filming, others were turning away. The illusion was breaking, and I hadn't even said a word to the crowd. I didn't smile when the banner came down. I just stood there as Jenkins walked into the house like a man with nothing to prove, clipped the eviction notice to the wall above the fireplace, and calmly explained, loud enough for everyone to hear, that the tenants had until Friday to vacate the premises. There was no dramatic outburst, no shouting match, no one hurling plates or storming off crying. The silence did all the work for me. It crept into the corners of every room, curled around the decorations, and wrapped itself around every fake smile. Guests stood frozen, paper plates dangling from their fingers. Someone whispered, "Is this part of the party?" A woman in heels awkwardly stepped back toward the door. 2 kids who were tossing a football in the backyard just stopped. The illusion, so carefully crafted by my parents and my brother, had cracked, and everyone could see it now. Marcus recovered first. He turned to the crowd with that oily grin he'd used since high school. Okay, he said, clapping his hands. "There's been a little misunderstanding. We were just having some fun. Ethan's a bit dramatic sometimes, but hey, that's family, right?" I stepped forward then, calm, measured, no anger, no sarcasm. I didn't authorize this party, I said to the room. I didn't invite anyone. I didn't order catering. I haven't lived here in nearly a decade. Every head turned to me. They used my name, I continued, to make it look like everything was fine, that I'd forgiven everything, that I'd come back as some prodigal son to shower them with gifts and attention. But the truth is, this isn't my house. It hasn't been for a long time. They lost it months ago, and they've been pretending otherwise ever since. There were gasps. A few people awkwardly glanced at each other. Pastor Miller, white-haired, kind-faced, took a slow step forward. "Son," he said gently. "Is that true?" I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Jenkins stepped back in, folded clipboard in hand. "It's true." Mr. and Mrs. Hayes were served multiple notices. Final warning expired this morning. Dad's face was turning purple, his fists clenched and unclenched at his sides, but he said nothing. Mom stepped toward me, eyes wide and glossy. "Please," she whispered. "We didn't know how to fix it. We just thought if you saw how much everyone missed you, how proud we are now." "Proud?" I asked, my voice soft. Her lips trembled. "We just wanted the family back together." "Then you shouldn't have thrown me out." I turned to Marcus. "And you shouldn't have committed credit card fraud." His face went pale. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer this week," I added. "I'm not pressing charges yet, but if I find even one more charge, one more lie, or if you tell anyone that I gifted this house to you, I'll escalate it." He didn't speak. And then, just to make things perfectly clear, I turned to the crowd again and pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket, the one containing the notarized statement I had prepared earlier that week. "I never intended to make this public," I said, "but my silence keeps getting twisted. So, this is a formal declaration that I have no legal or financial ties to this house. I paid off one debt last year out of kindness. That kindness was exploited. From today forward, I will not be covering, endorsing, or associating with any claims made by the Hayes family. If you hear my name come up, know that it wasn't with my permission." The room was dead quiet. Olivia stepped forward then, phone still in hand. "You all heard it," she said. "Let's stop pretending." Someone clapped just once, a sharp, uncomfortable sound. Then a few others joined, unsure but supportive. A few of the guests who hadn't already left slowly made their way out the door, murmuring apologies as they passed me. I didn't stop them. I didn't need their pity. I needed my freedom. Jenkins handed one last document to my father and turned to leave. "You've got until Friday. I suggest you start packing." As we walked toward the door, Dad finally spoke. "Ethan." I paused. "You think this makes you a man? Embarrassing your family in front of everyone?" I turned slowly, met his eyes, and said the one thing I'd been holding in since I was 15 years old, no. What makes me a man is walking away from people who only show up when they need something. Then I walked out. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because it was over, but because I was finally done. Olivia caught up with me on the lawn. "That was incredible," she whispered. I gave her a faint smile. "Thanks for being there. You were always the strong one, you know," she said. "They just didn't see it." I nodded. "They saw it. That's why they tried to bury it." We hugged. Then she left, and I stood alone on the edge of the sidewalk, watching the last balloon snap free of the mailbox and drift into the sky. I didn't look back. The fallout came fast. By Monday, the catering company had filed a small claim against my brother for breach of contract. My legal team followed up with a formal letter outlining the unauthorized use of company funds. It wasn't jail time stuff, but it would stick with him for a while, and that was enough. A scar he couldn't hide behind jokes. My parents tried calling me once. I didn't answer. Their voicemail was exactly what I expected: self-pity, guilt-tripping, a few barbed compliments wrapped in shame. I deleted it. I found out through Olivia later that most of the guests didn't stay long after I left. A few family members tried defending my parents, but most just nodded quietly and moved on. The illusion was gone, and with it, the grip they'd had on the narrative. By Friday morning, a moving van sat in front of the house. Jenkins sent me a photo. No caption, just Mom and Dad sitting on the porch steps, boxes stacked beside them. Marcus wasn't there. I didn't ask. I flew to Barcelona that night. My assistant had already booked the Airbnb, lined up a few remote meetings, and cleared my weekend. The apartment was small but beautiful. Sunlight poured through tall windows, and the streets below hummed with life. That night, I opened my journal and wrote something new: freedom isn't just walking away. It's knowing they can't follow you. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not victorious, not vindicated, just whole. Because I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all: sometimes the only way to fix a broken legacy is to leave it behind and let the silence speak louder than anything they ever could. Have you ever had to choose between your family's narrative and your own truth?